All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another Iowa Learning Farms webinar. My name is Elena Whitaker, and I am the Water and Conservation Outreach Educator with Iowa Learning Farms. Today, we're joined by Chris Hay, who is the principal at Hay Water Solutions, and Spencer Peck, who's a civil engineer at ISG. They're going to be talking about economic analysis of drainage water recycling systems. As usual, if you have any questions, feel free to submit them to the chat and we will get to them at the end of the presentation, but you can put questions in the chat at any time. And with that, go ahead and take it away, Chris and Spencer.
All right, thanks. Yeah, as Elena mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit about economics around drainage water recycling. And this was a collaborative effort between ISG, so Spencer Peck and Chuck Brandel with ISG and some of their other team members, and then myself with Hay Water Solutions, and then partnered with the Environmental Defense Fund. And so, as interest in this practice is increasing, we wanted to take a look at what are the economics around this and how does that impact how we think about moving ahead with implementation. So again, Lena already introduced us, but just real quick, and so you've got our contact information. Again, I'm Chris Hay, independent consultant operating as Hay Water Solutions.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And I'm Spencer Peck, as Elena mentioned. I'm a civil engineer at ISG. We're an engineering consulting firm. So I'm excited to talk a little bit about drainage water recycling today. So we're just going to start out today and talk a little bit about maybe as a refresher for some who know, and for those that aren't as familiar, a little bit about just the practice in general of drainage water recycling. And so the idea behind drainage water recycling is pretty simple, right? We have a lot of agricultural lands that are in most cases already, at least in some way, artificially drained to drain excess water off of them. And typically that drainage water is just outletting directly into a stream or river or drainage ditch and then continues to flow downstream. But with drainage water recycling, we're thinking about that a little differently, and we're outletting that water in some way into a storage reservoir. So the drainage water goes into some sort of a storage reservoir, and then some or all of that water is held in that reservoir from the early part of the year when there's excess water to later in the growing season when there's a shortage of water. And then that water is available to then be irrigated and essentially recycled back onto the land. I don't know if I cut out there for a second. If I did, I apologize. I think my connection was a little spotty, but what I was getting at is just that the water from the storage is then held until the later part of the year when it's needed on the fields, and then recycled back onto the land for irrigation. So one thing about drainage water recycling is it can take a lot of different sizes and shapes. And so I think this is a great graphic to show what that might look like. There might be different types of drainage, whether it's surface or subsurface, and then whether that drainage outlets via gravity or pump into the storage. And then the storage might look a few different ways. And then also the irrigation might look a few different ways. So there's a lot of variety in how the sites can come together, and they can be in a lot of different scales as well. What we want to do with this graphic is just kind of show that, and then we're going to kind of jump into how we sort of outlined the drainage water recycling site for this study. So before we do that, I just want to talk a little bit about kind of frame up the study. So for those that maybe aren't as familiar, there's a lot of previous research that was done around drainage water recycling. And what we found from some of the preliminary research is that drainage water recycling does increase crop yields. And it does provide benefits to shared drainage infrastructure. And additionally, drainage water recycling does provide water quality benefits. We know a lot about those independently, but maybe what we don't know as much about is what are the economics of drainage water recycling as a practice, looking holistically at it. Do those crop yield increases pay for the cost? Are those benefits measurable to the drainage infrastructure? And how do those water quality benefits compare to other practices? And so we're going to jump into now kind of the analysis that we did. And so starting out with the methodology, as I mentioned, these sites can take a lot of different shapes and sizes. And so in order to frame up our study, we developed what we call the model site. And so thinking about the different components of that model site, there's the drainage, and then the storage, and then the irrigation. And so thinking about the drainage area, what we did is actually I'll start with the irrigation area. So the darker green on the slide here, what we tried to do was find a best fit irrigation area for what we thought a typical site might be, understanding that in practice it's going to vary from there. And a typical site we tried to fit within what would be a typical quarter section agricultural field. And so you can see the 125 to 155 acres of irrigated area. Um, Going from that to the storage, the blue, based on some previous research that was done, we know that ideally for this practice in the areas that we're implementing it in the Midwest, we want to have between 4 and 6 inches of water available for every irrigated acre. So we sized our storage accordingly based on what our irrigated area was. And then third, we looked at the drainage area, and ultimately what our model site was really more of like what I would call an idealized drainage area. We were looking at a drainage area that's large enough to provide some measurable benefit in terms of drainage infrastructure savings and water quality savings, but understanding that the site could be feasible with a larger or smaller drainage area. In practice, that might vary quite a bit more. But we used a 1,500 acre drainage area, contributing drainage area for the purposes of our study. So now that we have kind of the size of the model site developed, we then started to look at the different variables and what options we wanted to further pursue. And so the first thing we looked at was the storage location and how the storage was constructed. And we have some graphics we'll show in a second that will, I think, make this more clear. But we looked at both on-channel, meaning active storage, and off-channel passive storage. We then looked at what type or kind of water are we going to be collecting. So we'll be collecting surface water, whether that's from a river or a stream, or surface runoff from an agricultural field, or will we be collecting subsurface tile drainage water from a tile main or drainage ditch, or some combination of both. And in a lot of cases, it was both. But we did look at those 3 different potential water collections. And then finally, we looked at 3 different irrigation methods, which we'll elaborate more on later. But those are kind of based on what is most commonly going to be used in these geographies: center pivot irrigation, subsurface drip irrigation, and then sub irrigation. So just to kind of show a visualization of what the model site might look like here, this is an on-channel storage reservoir. So kind of at the top of the visualization there, you can see the white outline that's intended to show the contributing watershed, that 1,500 acre watershed. You notice the light blue lines through there. Those are meant to show the public drainage system in this case that we were looking at for our study, but ultimately any type of drainage system that drains that 1,500 acres. And then that drains, as you see, through an open ditch and then active storage reservoir downstream. What you'll note about the active storage reservoir is that, as we mentioned before, it's on channel, meaning that it is active. It collects all the water that drains from the 1,500 acres, not just some portion of it. And then any excess water that's not stored in that basin passes through and outlets. And then adjacent to that basin, we have our irrigated area, which is shown with an irrigation supply pipeline, and then the center pivot irrigation as well. The last piece I just want to mention on this too, we'll talk about a little more later, but we also showed some other potential. One of the great things about drainage water recycling is you can add a lot of other infrastructure components into it. And so we have a wetland restoration and a saturated buffer shown as sort of like supplemental natural infrastructure to improve our water quality benefits as well. And then obviously downstream of all this, we have our stream or river that the excess water would flow into. So if we look at the passive storage reservoir, you'll notice really pretty much everything is the same as the active, except for our storage reservoir is off to the side of the channel. And in this case, we're passively collecting some portion of the water from the channel or the stream, or in this case, drainage ditch, and we're collecting that in the stored reservoir. But the important distinction is that we're not collecting all of that water, and we're allowing some of that water to bypass that channel across. So that gives a little bit of kind of visualization and direction on what this model site that we completed our analysis is on. And I think on the next slide, we talk a little more about the storage. So I mentioned previously, there's kind of a range of storage volumes to consider. What we looked at for sort of like bracketing that is based on some previous research that was done that found that sort of the ideal range for storage for drainage water recycling irrigation is anywhere from 4 to 6 inches per irrigated acre. So when we applied that to the center pivot irrigation method, you can see there the range of acre feet of storage size that we would have for the model site.
Yeah, and then as Spencer mentioned, we looked at three different types of irrigation. So center pivot, probably the most common form of irrigation in the U.S. and one of the most cost-effective forms of irrigation. We looked at subsurface drip, which is becoming popular on smaller sites or oddly shaped fields where center pivot maybe doesn't fit as well. And then because we're looking in subsurface drained areas, that you often some interest in being able to use the drainage system itself as the form of irrigation and not have to invest in separate irrigation infrastructure. So we looked at that idea of sub irrigation as well. So then looking at the different costs that went into our analysis, obviously there's the public and private drainage system cost. There's design and planning that goes into designing the systems, some site investigation that has to happen. In many cases, there may be some storage and land easement and some acquisition costs that go into that storage, as well as the construction costs. Obviously, construction costs for the irrigation as well, ongoing operations and maintenance, and then monitoring and management of those systems as well. So we look at storage construction. That storage construction is largely a function of how much excavation we've got to do. So obviously the cheapest is if we're retrofitting some existing storage. And so in that case, much of the excavation's already been done. And so that's obviously the cheapest. The most expensive would be the active tile, where if you're going to get down and capture all the water coming through a subsurface drainage main, there's going to be quite a bit of excavation that goes into that to get down to that level where the main's at to be able to capture all that water. And so the rest of the costs then are kind of distributed in there, again, largely a function of how much excavation has to happen. When we look at the irrigation costs, used some values around the region and looking at how much potential or typical costs are for these different irrigation systems. So center pivot there, the CP was the cheapest system. Looking at doing a full circle within a quarter section, that ends up being about 125 acres. Again, using some typical values for the region, looked at what the annual operations maintenance costs are, and then typical lifespans for those systems. Then sub-irrigation and subsurface drip were similar in cost, about double the cost of center pivot. They can irrigate a little more acre area because they don't have the corners that we've got with the center pivot system. Operations and maintenance a little bit less than the center pivot, and the lifespan similar for subsurface drip. We estimated a little longer lifespan for the sub irrigation. So when we apply those costs over time, taking into account the time value of money, then we can look at an equivalent annual cost of those systems. Again, center pivot works out to be the most cost effective of those systems, with sub irrigation and subsurface drip pretty similar. So that was the cost side. Now, if we look on the benefit side of the equation, some of the benefits we looked at were what are the yield improvements from that supplemental irrigation? Maybe some potential yield improvements from upgrading the drainage infrastructure as well. Some farm operation savings because we've added this new management capability with the irrigation. So options like fertigation, chemigation, some of those types of things may provide some operational savings. We looked at the water quality benefits that we can get, again, by capturing and reusing some of this drainage water that otherwise would go downstream along with the nutrients in that water. And then some benefits to shared drainage infrastructure. And so with that storage, we can increase some of the capacity of that system, provide some outlet relief, and especially if upgrades are involved, that can reduce some of the cost by not needing as large a mains with that system. So focusing on the irrigation benefits, again, we're looking at the different irrigation types, center pivot versus sub-irrigation, subsurface drip. And then we looked at two different ways of estimating the corn price. So the Phillips is Sam Phillips. He was a master's student that worked with Matt Helmers and I. He had done some work with one of the ag economists at Iowa State, looking at corn prices basically since 2000. And then the ERS, that's the USDA Economic Research Service. So they've done some projections out 10 years of what corn prices may do over the next 10 years. And so we kind of looked at, what what corn prices look like now versus what they might look like in 10 years. The other thing that factors in there is crop yield. And so for center pivot and subsurface drip, we base that off of what we've observed for the systems we've monitored in Iowa. For sub-irrigation, unfortunately, we don't have good yield information on sub-irrigation in Iowa, so we're relying on some sub-irrigation yield estimates from the Transforming Drainage Project, a little more region-wide. So they were a little less than what we've seen so far in Iowa center pivots, and so again, we see a higher benefit with the center pivot subsurface drip, a little lower with the sub-irrigation. So then applying our benefits and costs together, then kind of looking at the life cycle analysis, the again, net equivalent value of that irrigation is highest with center pivot, a little less with subsurface drip. Because of some of the assumptions we made, and I'll get into that on the next slide, we actually ended up with a negative value for sub irrigation. And so payback period with that center pivot was about 13 years, subsurface drip about 19 years. So I mentioned, we had a negative value with sub-irrigation, and some of that was some of the assumptions that we were working with in this analysis, because of the, working with Environmental Defense Fund, and part of what they were wanting to look at is not increasing any of the drainage benefit of that. And so that was kind of the assumptions we were working under. But depending on who's paying for this and how those constraints are, if you do upgrade that drainage system at the same time that you're implementing sub-irrigation, some of the work that a colleague out of Michigan State's done has shown that we may expect about a 7 bushel per acre yield increase from that sub-irrigation if we size the system to accommodate that. So once we do that, then we can see some potential additional drainage benefit of $27 to $30 per acre. If we factor that into that analysis, that actually does turn that sub-irrigation value positive. And so again, it's going to be a function of who's paying for investing in these systems and what their constraints are, but there may be some benefit for sub-irrigation as well. But overall, still center pivot was our most cost-effective form of irrigation. Looking at water quality, we've just got a few years of water quality data from our monitoring in Iowa, and it's biased by them mostly being a couple of pretty dry years. And so we had really, really high water quality benefits. So that's good to see, but also probably not reflective of what we might see over the longer term. So to get an idea of what it might look like longer term, these are based on a review of a number of different reservoirs worldwide on what kind of the nutrient reduction benefits of those reservoirs are. And so applying kind of those standard reductions based on that analysis of reservoirs, we looked at kind of the low end and the high end of what we might see for water quality benefits. So the low end would be that 4-inch passive or off-stream reservoir. So we don't have as much storage, and we're only filling that storage when there's storage available to fill. And so of that catchment yield, or what is coming from that 1,500 acres upstream, a lot of that is going to bypass just because we don't have a place to put that water. And so it's going to continue on downstream, and those nutrients that are in that water will also continue downstream. What we do pump into the reservoir then, much of that, we do see quite a bit of reduction of that. So of the 1,400 pounds or so of nitrogen that comes in, 600 just gets reduced just from processes in the reservoir. Another 700 or so gets irrigated back onto the field, and so we assume that's going to be taken up by the crop or otherwise not make it back downstream. And then there's a little bit of seepage loss in there. On the other end of the spectrum, then, if we look at the 6-inch larger storage and then also active, so all the water coming from that catchment area is going through the storage, we still are going to have to bypass some of that water because just we won't have enough storage for all of that. But all of that water does get some level of treatment. And so that reservoir reduction number goes up dramatically. So 15,000 pounds of nitrogen reduction. Again, quite a bit that goes into irrigation as well, 1,000 pounds more because we've got a little larger reservoir, more water available to recycle back to the field as irrigation. So again, a much bigger benefit with that active storage and larger storage. So finally, we took those costs, those benefits, and then looked at how we might kind of package those together in some investment scenarios. And one of the things that this showed was it'd be really tough to justify this for the farmer to invest it in entirely themselves. We can see that there's an irrigation benefit, but to pay for the storage as well would be challenging to if it's purely privately funded. And so we looked at pairing kind of private investment in the irrigation system for the agricultural benefit to the farmer, along with some public or other investment in the storage for the water quality benefits that accrue downstream. And so looking at a couple different scenarios, and what those look like. Again, active storage, more water quality benefits. So that's going to be more attractive for folks interested in paying for those water quality benefits that had a sizable net present value, great return on investment, payback period about 13 years. One other thing we looked at was kind of a community storage investment scenario where we're pairing three different irrigated fields, all drawing from the same reservoir. And so we get some economies of scale that way. And so with those economies of scale, we see a larger net present value. Again, good return on investment, a little bit longer pay period, but another really attractive scenario. Less attractive is that passive storage. Again, just because there's less water quality benefit, so we assume there's probably going to be less desire to fund some of that storage with less water quality benefit that comes with that. So longer return period or payback period on that, and then the retrofit. Then again, showing that if we can take advantage of some of those costs that have already been accrued for creating some of that storage, we can have some benefits that way as well. So I'll turn it back to Spencer to kind of bring us home.
Yeah, sounds great. Thanks, Chris. Just want to start kind of talking about some of the conclusions about the yield and cost benefits from the producer standpoint, because that is how we kind of ran the economic analysis, was from the standpoint of the producer and their benefits. And so looking first here, we look at the annual yield improvements from the irrigation, which Chris kind of summarized those numbers earlier. One thing to note is that we did base this on corn production and a lot of the existing research that's done. One of our key takeaways from the study was that if there are ways that the producer can implement this to really increase that yield improvement from irrigation, whether it be higher value crops or irrigating acres that maybe have a higher water need because of soil types or whatever, that can make a huge difference in the returns. And then moving over to the farm operating savings, some potential efficiencies gained, being able to use the fertigation and chemigation with the irrigation system. And then finally at the bottom there, a potential range of economic benefits from the drainage system capacity improvement as well. And that's more based on larger scale replacement and upgrade of existing drainage infrastructure, and then the benefits you might see on a wet year where you realize the full value of that improved infrastructure. Looking a little more at the environmental benefits. So when we averaged out between the two different water quality scenarios that Chris showed, we get the average nitrogen and phosphorus removal for the model site. And then when we apply some potential societal values of nitrate removal to the nitrogen, excuse me, you can see up to $40,000 a year in added benefits to downstream communities from that nitrogen reduction. So potentially pretty significant environmental benefits, in this case specifically for nutrient reduction. And then the last piece that we also mentioned was just the infrastructure savings. I know we didn't go too in depth in this, but we've talked about this on actually I think I talked about this on a previous Iowa Learning Farms webinar back in the day. But some of the savings that say a shared drainage system might see from implementing storage, because that storage provides some outlet relief and allows for a smaller main to be utilized and provide the same level of drainage for the system. And so just want to kind of summarize some of our key takeaways from the study. So the first thing is that we found that drainage water recycling can be cost effective when you look at it holistically. And as Chris mentioned there, active basins with center pivots were the most cost effective because we're maximizing the benefits and also slightly lower cost with the center pivot as well. And so while they are economically viable, it's important that the site is well sited and well designed, meaning that you've got the right irrigation system designed for the constraints of your site. And then that kind of leads into the second key takeaway is the importance of maximizing the benefits. So the sites are the most successful, as we saw, and have the best ROI when we achieve multiple benefits, whether that's maximizing the yield benefits from the irrigation and also maximizing the water quality benefits. Because the only way that these projects are successful is ultimately if they provide benefits to that variety of stakeholders, including some of that public funding that we need to have to make these projects possible. So when we can maximize those benefits and we can have that funding to help pay for the water quality components, that makes the projects cost effective. And ultimately, we did find in our analysis that, and especially for our model site, in most situations, the project is likely not economically feasible without some level of outside funding. But the good news is that what we found in our work here was that that drainage water recycling is comparable to a lot of other more widely adopted best management practices in terms of its efficiency in nutrient removal and cost per pound of removal. And so it appears, at least from our work, that the investment into these types of systems for the storage and water quality components is justified, especially when we look at those active sites that have the higher potential for nutrient removal. So just want to kind of close out here by sharing, and actually I have it up with me right now. I'm not sure if it will blur out, but you can see we have a report here that sort of summarizes everything that we've talked about here today. And as Chris mentioned before, ISG and Haywater Solutions were fortunate enough to work with Environmental Defense Fund on this work. And so if you're interested in hearing a lot more detail about our analysis and a lot more of how we did a lot of these calculations, I want to encourage you to check out the report. And if you don't want to get into the weeds, the good news is the report has a shortened executive summary that will give you the high level takeaways as well. So really want to plug checking out that report, and I think that provides a lot more insights than we were able to pack into the presentation today. So I think with that might be all we have, and just want to thank Elena and Dr. Helmers and Iowa Learning Farms for having us on today and for the opportunity to share this work. We're really excited about it, and we think it provides a lot of answers to some important questions about the future of drainage water recycling and adoption. So
Yeah, so looking forward to some questions, and I know we've got some slides here to work through with Elena. So
Yeah, perfect. Okay, if you have questions, keep submitting them. We have a few already, but keep adding them to the chat. If you are on the webinar today to earn a continuing education credit, go ahead and email me, alenaw@iastate.edu by 5 o'clock today with your name, the name you entered to watch the webinar, if it's different on your Zoom, and then your CCA number, and we can get those submitted for credits. If you would like to fill out our voluntary demographic survey, we just need it once for the whole year of 2025. So if you've already done this, fantastic. If you haven't, or if you're new to our webinars, feel free to fill this out. You can either scan the QR code on the screen or go to www.iowalearningfarms.org/survey. Join us next week. I know a lot of people might be starting their holiday vacations, but next week we have a webinar about We Can Do Better, Paul Johnson's legacy for agriculture, conservation, and land stewardship. So that's going to be with Kurt Main. I'm not exactly for sure, but he's with the Aldo Leopold Foundation and Center for Humans and Nature. So please join in next week for that one on the 26th. And lastly, it is getting to be cold outside, and that means that Iowa Learning Farms is starting our virtual field days. So if you'd like to join on December 4th, Thursday, December 4th at 1 p.m. Central Time, we're going to have our first virtual field day of the season, and it's all about exploring the impacts of residue management on crop yield and fertilizer inputs. You can register for it / find the Zoom link on our website, iowalearningfarms.org/events-1. So hope to see you at that virtual field day. Okay. Oh, one last slide. There's so many slides. If you would like to find this webinar and all of our previous webinars, they are recorded, they are archived. You can find them on our website, iowalearningfarms.org/webinars, or we've also have a YouTube channel You can see the link on the screen if you look up Iowa Learning Farms webinars on YouTube. There, we sort them by year and kind of by topic, so playlist, in different playlists and stuff like that. So you can find any of our webinars online in a couple locations. All right, now with that, let's answer some questions. So we've got a question here asking, were there any permitting issues that you came across when working with the channels? And then basically to add on to that, are there any good resources you found in streamlining the permitting workflow?
Yeah, I think I can definitely take that one. And this is a question I think I've actually got when I presented on this one other time too. And the answer is yes, definitely there are permitting challenges, and there are certain constraints that have to be worked within for the active storage. And that was actually, I believe, one of our takeaways in the report was like that the active storage does have the potential to create better, at least nutrient removal outcomes. However, it is a more challenging site to permit for some of those reasons. Any good resources you found in streamlining the permitting workflow? Say maybe, but I'm not sure if we have enough time today to talk through that in depth. So I'll just say that the active sites are definitely more challenging to permit for sure, and that was factored into the analysis.
Hmm. Okay, perfect. Uh, there's a question asking about for the center pivot, was there any effort in looking to adding a swing arm to the center pivot so you'd be able to irrigate the corners of the field more completely?
So something we considered, but didn't end up looking at. And I think because of the context we're in here, where really we're only looking at supplemental irrigation, so it's it's not a large part of the water supply. Most of the water supply is still coming from rain, and so the the cost benefit just didn't seem to make sense with looking at some of those more expensive options. We did look at an end gun on the end of the arm to catch some more area, but as far as actually getting one of those swing arms to capture more area, probably more cost than it's worth, and kind of these supplemental irrigation scenarios.
Perfect. Okay. Have you done any fertility analysis on for the fertility that's provided through the irrigated water? They're asking, for instance, is there any boron, zinc, K20, P2O5 value on top of the N value?
Great question. No is the answer, the short answer. So yeah, I think that is some untapped potential is to really do some more analysis of what those fertility values are and what we can achieve. Uh, so yeah, I think that it's a value that we recognize is there, but we really don't know the full extent of that value, and so I think that's a need for some continuing research.
Okay. This next question, did you consider the value of the difference in pumping price from the storage area, basically in all of your options, which isn't that deep, versus pumping from a well or somewhere thing that's 300 feet deep?
No, so we're operating on the assumption that we're just pumping out of that storage, and so we're looking at relatively low lifts that way. Um, I think not in this context, but in some other contexts, we've looked at how this might compare to other methods of irrigation, and so then you do get into that comparison of what's the pumping cost of if you're drawing deeper groundwater versus pumping more from closer to the surface, and so it is something that or if you're trying to supplement that storage water with some groundwater as well, then all those costs are going to come into play.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would just add to that is that when we did look at the operation and maintenance costs of the irrigation, we did consider that I'll call it that lower head pumping. And so, those costs are reflective of the lower head pumping. Whereas, like Chris said, we didn't do any comparison to the well water pumping in our report. But I would imagine that if you were pumping that groundwater from a well, your operations cost would be higher just for the more energy needed to lift that water.
Perfect. Okay, the next question is asking about biodiversity. Does drainage water recycling enhance biodiversity, or could it cause some concerns if it's attracting migrating birds or even like water-loving plant species kind of taking over the storage unit, maybe getting in the irrigation system?
Another great question, and another one where we need some more research. So I know there were some systems in Ohio 20 20 years ago, so where they were looking at this, and they did do a little bit of some surveys and certainly saw some positive impacts on amphibian species and amphibian populations, and anecdotally, I've seen that as well at some of our Iowa sites that a lot of frogs and amphibians really taking advantage of that habitat. So there are some potential benefits that way. Yeah, there may be some potential downsides too, and I think that's again, be nice to work with someone in the wildlife field to take a look at some of those and see what those might be. On the flip side, that's also something that could be built into the design. And so if there's certain desired wildlife aspects or unintended consequences we want to avoid, we can bring that into the design and design with some of those in mind. Um, and then on the vegetation side, we do see some algal growth and duckweed. We'll see some duckweed growing in there too. The good thing is it does seem like as long as we are doing some pumping for irrigation, it does kind of stir that up and does seem to limit that in some cases. But if it sits there stagnant for a long time, then we may see some more issues with algae. But we also design into that some filtration to try and prevent that from impacting the irrigation system.
Okay, perfect. That kind of leads into one of our next questions. People were asking, are there extra filters um, when you're doing subsurface drip or filters in the pivot nozzles or anything like that?
I could take this one, Chris. I think in that case, yes, I think that would have to be a consideration. One of the caveats I would put on is maybe how the water is being withdrawn from the reservoir. So there's a few different ways, whether you're drawing water off of the top with like a surface skimmer, or if there's like a deep water inlet wet well system. But I think that is definitely a consideration that would need to be considered, and while not specifically mentioned in our report, would be something that would be part of the proper design and construction of one of these sites.
Yeah, and the center pivot folks that have worked on the systems that we've done in Iowa, they've taken that into account a little bit with the nozzling too, just to provide some extra protection that way. With subsurface drip, absolutely, and on any system, any subsurface drip system, there's going to be some filtration and also some chemical injection to prevent algal, growth of algae and stuff, and that would plug up those systems. So that is part of subsurface strip design to begin with.
Okay, the next question, how do you see adoption of these storage practices spreading um, in Iowa and other states in the Midwest? And then follow up, how can government agencies help be a part of that spread and adoption?
Yeah, I think this is a great plug for the report too, because I think we have a section specifically in the report that talks about this
Mm.
as well. And a couple things I'll just mention that we talked about in the report are the potential for consideration of using the irrigation tailwater recovery practice standard to apply to this project type, among some other things that Chris, you might want to elaborate on too.
And I was going to say that um, the early research had shown kind of the benefits, and then this was to look at the economics. Now, kind of the next frontier is what are the social aspects of this, and so I think working through how we integrate this into funding programs and working with drainage districts and working amongst multiple landowners that may get involved in these. The simple ones are going to be where it's all on one landowner's plot of land. But if we're going to make it work successfully, oftentimes we're going to be working with multiple landowners. And so, how do we deal with all those dynamics? And so, I think that's probably the next frontier that we have to look at.
Okay. Someone was asking for the report, and so I found actually, Spencer, your article from a couple weeks ago on ISG's website that has a link to the full report. I've put that in the chat so people
Great.
can
Perfect.
copy that and find the full report if you would like. Uh, hold on, scrolling through. We have a lot of questions.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
I love it.
Someone said that they saw that the cost of the storage pond and center pivot were included in the costs. But what about the other items such as the pumping systems, filtration, and pipelines and stuff like that? Was that included in your costs?
Yeah, so we're just hitting highlights in this presentation. The full report would have the details, but yeah, we did take into account that yeah, there's pumping involved, and so with the cost of the pumping plants and the energy that goes into that, the pipelines to get it to the irrigation system and all of that. So obviously, as Spencer said, these systems can take on an infinite number of configurations. So we did make some assumptions there, but those costs were considered.
Perfect. Okay. Someone has a question about potential benefits, that there is a benefit associated with the stored water not contributing at the same time as the other water in the watershed accumulating downstream. Um, so they're wondering about additional sediment and phosphorus loss. Did you consider these costs in your calculations? Like if there's less sediment, less phosphorus going downstream?
Um, I guess not to the way I think the question's posed. I don't think we didn't look at that, and I like that is a you know it's an interesting question and something I think that again requires some more study. We have seen at one site that we did see a little bit of stream scour downstream of the reservoir, and so I think I think that was that sediment settling out. We're creating some hungrier water that's being released, and we did see a little bit of scour that way, and so yeah, I think that will be part of some of the work as we continue to figure out how we best implement these to try and prevent some of those potential impacts from happening. But I guess uh, again, it can be a plus or can be a minus that we're also removing some of that sediment, and so we've created some forebays on those storage systems to capture some of that sediment, and so can also have some benefits from preventing some of that sediment from going downstream too. But yeah, there may be some issues with scour downstream as well.
Okay, so kind of along the lines of sedimentation, uh, they're wondering if the storage systems are designed with a certain lifespan, because they're thinking along the lines of sedimentation ponds that we have in Iowa. Like, would this storage area potentially fill up with sedimentation and then need dug out?
Yeah, that's a great question and kind of ties into what Chris was just mentioning there. Like, so first of all, it does depend on the storage type, right? So a passive subsurface storage basin has much less sediment loading into it than, say, an active surface storage basin. But that was included within the storage design and construction was like a sediment forebay, and then also within the operation and maintenance of the storage basin, we included regular cleaning as needed to remove that sediment out of there.
Okay, fantastic. This person asked, does this mean that over the years, drainage storage water might be the only source of water for irrigation? Like many years from now, do we see that as the future?
I'm not sure I would go that far, but I think that's bigger picture. One of the things we're seeing in the U.S. certainly is that irrigation is decreasing in the traditionally irrigated areas of the West, and that's both physical and legal limitations to water supply. But it's increasing in the eastern U.S., and that's risk management around weather variability and so as we see continue to see more irrigation growth in areas that weren't traditionally irrigated, we're going to start to see some more of those conflicts and over water supply. And so I think that's one of the benefits here is that we can potentially reduce some of that stress on other surface water or groundwater supplies by reusing some of that drainage water. And so I think what I'm thinking and hoping is that this can be a more sustainable water supply, so that we can better use our other water supplies for other purposes as needed.
Perfect. Okay, this next one is a person's asking, what are the key discussion points to cover when doing outreach with a landowner or a producer who is interested in drainage water recycling? Probably a lot. What are the key points?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a few of the things that first come to mind for me, I think, are from the landowner's perspective and the economics of it, this only works if they get a good return on their irrigation. So I think they have to feel comfortable with doing the irrigation, have an area sort of that they have planned for the irrigation, and that irrigation, how should I say, has to be implemented as efficiently as possible in terms of like if it is a large field, then center pivot is probably the best option. But if maybe it's a field that's much more suitable to sub irrigation or something else, or like if they have higher value crops, like that return on the irrigation, I would say is the most important part. And then the second piece is then starting to think about very early on about siting the storage because the storage does take up space, right? And as much as we'd like to always put that in a space that's not already in production or whatever, there is the possibility that they may have to take some acres out of production to site the storage. So I think those are two of the first things that are important for the landowner to understand if it's a project or a practice they're interested in.
And I'll just
Okay.
add that one of the first things is, I think most folks underestimate the amount of storage that's going to be needed
Hmm.
and the area
Mhm.
that can take. And so, that's often one of the first things is just getting that understanding of here's what it's going to take and here's what that might look like. And so, they can get a good feel, better feel for whether they're going to be comfortable with that.
Perfect. Okay, so looking at next steps, what work needs to be done to make this a fundable practice?
I think again we're kind of laid the groundwork there. We got pretty good proof of concept that there are benefits to this, and I think this work helps show that it can also be economical. So I think that's the starting point. Now it's continuing to build on some of what we've already done to get the potential funders for this comfortable and interested in wanting to fund this. Because again, I think what we've shown is probably can't do it through private investment alone. It is going to take some outside funding, and so it's really working on getting those sources of funding that can make this happen, and then again how we work with the social dynamics to actually implement it. So yeah. Uh, Yes, there's still some work for the engineers and scientists to do, but I think some of the next work is really going to be more the social scientists and how we actually make this happen. So I think that's probably some of the next steps.
Perfect. And it sounds like also some research with biodiversity and wildlife and adding that into the benefits analysis and stuff like that.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, the more we can quantify benefits, the more potential there is to fund
Yep.
these and
Mhm.
get more diversity of those funding options. So absolutely.
Perfect. Okay, well, I think we've got through most of the questions. If I've missed your question, I'm so sorry. Um, but thank you again, Chris and Spencer, for presenting today. I always love learning about new topics, and I've had a little bit of background with drainage water recycling, but I learned a lot today, so that's really exciting. Again, you could find this recording of the webinar later if you want to share it with some of your coworkers or if you know some people that just would find a benefit from the look on the screen right now to find where we post our recordings. In other words, any last thoughts, Chris or Spencer, that you'd like to add in?
I'll just really briefly here mention there was a question about the economy side and Chris and I's background in economy, and
Mm,
I do want to give a quick shout out to Milan and Vincent and the Climate Smart Ag team at EDF, who were the
mm.
economists we worked with. And so I have a very limited economies background. I'm a civil engineer, but it was really great working with them in their experience on that side of things.
Yeah, and I'll just add, again, thanks again to the Iowa Learning Farms. It's I always enjoy the webinar series, and so it's fun to be on the other side and actually presenting this time. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's been an exciting project, and again, I think it's a practice that I think has a lot of potential, and so one I'm passionate about and excited to continue to see advance.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you. And with that, we'll go ahead and end. Thank you both.
All right, thanks.
Thanks.